But opposition to the war spreads outside of the political class. It spreads to regular parts of society, including large portions of New England. And one of the people who leads this sort of popular anti-war resistance is Henry David Thoreau, this great transcendental thinker of Massachusetts. And he writes first an essay and then a book on civil disobedience. And in Civil Disobedience, he attempts to tackle one of the sort of great philosophical existential questions, which is, how does one live a good life in an unjust world? And Henry David Thoreau decides that while his country is fighting this unjust war, Thoreau is not going to pay any taxes. He says, I'm not going to support a government that does such wickedness. And indeed, there's this great quote by Henry David Thoreau over there on the left. Anyone in a free society where laws are unjust has an obligation to break the law. And he refuses to pay taxes. He breaks the law, and Henry David Thoreau goes to jail. We'll return to Henry David Thoreau in jail. And because Polk is in this political checkmate in terms of the Wilmot Proviso, opposition to the war begins to combine with the already powerful and gathering steam of abolition. They now have a sliver of political power, and they're going to use it. The anti-war movement fuses with the abolitionist movement, and the abolitionist movement is growing very, very powerful. And the leader of the abolitionist movement is right up there on the upper left. That's William Lloyd Garrison. And William Lloyd Garrison is convinced that the existing political structure in the United States is hopelessly broken. And we have to force America to accept racial equality and an end to slavery. And he creates the American Anti-Slavery Society. He publishes a newspaper called The Liberator. And he's such a rebel. One of the things I really love about William Lloyd Garrison is that the paper is banned in the South. The Liberator is absolutely banned in large portions of the South, a direct conflict to the First Amendment. And if he went down there to distribute this abolitionist newspaper talking about the evils of slavery, I mean, my God, he would be shot. So William Lloyd Garrison figures out a loophole to deliver his abolitionist newspaper to the South. He realizes that, according to the law, post office workers, postal officials are legally obligated to deliver the mail. So he just starts randomly mailing the Liberator and all of this abolitionist literature, just randomly mailing it to people in the South. And even though these postal officials and these mailmen really, really hate abolition, they are legally obligated to deliver the paper. He gets these Southern racists to deliver abolitionist literature. It's genius. And one of William Lloyd Garrison is not just an abolitionist. He's not just opposed to slavery. He embraces true racial equality, and he seeks out African-American voices to oppose slavery. And he hits the total jackpot when he discovers one of the greatest orators and writers in American history, Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass begins to write fervently against slavery. He is an escaped slave. He escapes from Maryland and makes it to Massachusetts, where he lives openly. He just says, I am an escaped slave, daring people to capture him and drag him back to the South. But no one will do it. The people of Boston and the people of Massachusetts make a decision to break the law and protect Frederick Douglass. And while he's protected, Frederick Douglass writes one of the great books of American history, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. It is one of the great classic abolitionist tracts, and it is a powerful voice. And Frederick Douglass is 10 times the writer and 20 times the orator that William Lloyd Garrison is. And even now in the 21st century, Frederick Douglass is far more famous than William Lloyd Garrison. Also operating throughout the time, The abolitionist movement embraces these ideas of Henry David Thoreau, that in an unjust society, you have a moral obligation to break the law. And man, do they break the law. They began to build the Underground Railroad, a system where they help slaves escape to the north, where they can be protected by people, they can be protected by abolitionists. And in some cases where they can't be protected, they can be moved all the way to British Canada, where slavery is illegal, and British Canada refuses to extradite escaped slaves. And some of these people in the Underground Railroad are very famous. You've probably heard of some of them. There's Harriet Tubman, who personally leads over 300 American slaves to freedom in the North and Canada. And there's probably a guy you haven't heard of, Cassius Clay. The boxer Cassius Clay is named after the abolitionist Cassius Clay. And Cassius Clay has to go down in history as probably one of the most badass abolitionists ever. He's incredibly wealthy. He's from this incredibly wealthy and powerful family in Kentucky. And he basically goes, he's in the North, and there's a speech being given by William Lloyd Garrison. And Cassius Clay owns slaves. He's a slave owner. So he says, you know what? I've heard about this guy. I'm going to go see this. I'm going to go see William Lloyd Garrison speak because I want to make fun of this guy. I want to go back to Kentucky and say, yeah, I saw this crazy abolitionist speak. Here's what that fool said. So Cassius Clay goes to see a speech by William Lloyd Garrison. And the abolitionist Garrison doesn't say anything crazy. He doesn't say anything really insane. And the next day, Cassius Clay goes to another speech by William Lloyd Garrison. Then he goes to a speech by Frederick Douglass. And then he goes to meet with William Lloyd Garrison. And he has this almost religious experience. Cassius Clay describes meeting with William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass as, how does he describe it? He describes it as being handed a pitcher of ice water and not even realizing that you are dying of thirst. He completely embraces the abolitionist cause. Unregardedly, he just embraces the abolitionist cause. He returns to Kentucky. He frees the slaves he can. The slaves he can't free, he escapes with. He helps them get in contact with the Underground Railroad. He starts one of the few abolitionist tracks in the South, and is just unreservedly attacking Southern slavery. And man, they try to kill Cassius Clay so many times. Oh man, they try to kill Cassius Clay at least 3 times. He's jumped by 6 gunmen at one point, and he gets into a gunfight with these 6 men and wins. He kills one of them, drives the other 5 away. One time he's walking down I think he's in Knoxville. He's walking down the street in Knoxville, and the slave owners have hired an assassin to kill Cassius Clay. And he's walking down the street, and he sees this guy walking towards him, looking him straight in the eye, and he's like, wait, something's up. And when the guy goes for a gun, Cassius Clay goes for his Bowie knife. And a Bowie knife, if you don't know, is a big Southern fighting knife. It's the length of your forearm, so it's a knife with a blade about this big and about this thick. Apocryphally invented by Jim Bowie. And as Cassius Clay is pulling out his knife, the assassin fires the bullet, and the bullet strikes the blade of the Bowie knife and is deflected. And then Cassius Clay leaps on the guy and proceeds to beat the guy. He doesn't kill him, but to make sure that the assassin can't ever work again, he cuts the dude's eyes out. Cassius Clay brought a knife to a gunfight and won. And then later, he helps the Underground Railroad. He publishes anti-slavery papers. He distributes the Liberator. He distributes, Frederick Douglass's writings. And at one point in time, a lynch mob gathers. A lynch mob gathers to go kill Cassius Clay. It's made of these 60 racist slave owners, and this mob gets together. They're going to go kill Cassius Clay. And they make a move towards his house. And Cassius Clay has a pretty good idea that something like this would happen. So Cassius Clay had armed himself. He had more than just a Bowie knife. Did Cassius Clay arm himself with pistols? No pistols for Cassius Clay. Did Cassius Clay, a shotgun? Did Cassius Clay arm himself with a shotgun? No. A rifle? No. The enraged mob arrives at Cassius Clay's house to find Cassius Clay has loaded a cannon on his porch and has leveled it at the racist mob. He has an artillery piece. And he tells the racist mob that he has no fear of death. And if they kill him, he'll go sit beside, his Lord and Savior, while these racist crackers are all going to burn in hell. And that's Cassius Clay. And like I said, let me get back to the lecture. Basically, the anti-war movement begins to meld with the abolitionist movement. Now, Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience has become this classic work of civil disobedience. It is shockingly not the most influential book of its day. We're going to meet that book in the next lecture. But it has become a very widespread book. It's a book that should be read by people dealing with injustices and how to be a good person in an unjust society. And Mahatma Gandhi read Henry David Thoreau. Martin Luther King read Henry David Thoreau. And if you ever find yourself in that kind of position, you should bone up on some Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau refuses to pay his taxes because he refuses to participate and fund a government that does unjust things like invade Mexico. And he writes the following passage about what to do. And this is what he says. And I want you to listen to this very carefully. Under a government which imprisons any unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison. The proper place today, the only place which Massachusetts has provided for her freer and less desponding spirits, is in her prisons, to be put away and locked out of the state by her own act, as they have already put themselves out by their principles. It is there that the fugitive slave and the Mexican prisoner on parole and the Indian should come to plead the wrongs of their race, should find them, that on separate but on more free and honorable ground, where the state places those who are not with her against her. Here's the kicker. The only house in a slave state which a free man can abide with honor is in the jail. Only there do you know you are not part of the burden of being in an unjust society. And Henry David Thoreau spends a lot of the Mexican War in jail. Mexico refuses to negotiate. Santa Anna refuses to negotiate, so James Polk reluctantly agrees on an invasion of central Mexico under General Winfield Scott. And they land on March 9th, 1847. The U.S. Army in the largest amphibious assault yet conducted. They disembark from their ships in the Gulf of Mexico, and they storm ashore at the city of Veracruz. They surround the city, and the city, it's a walled city. The city has a 20-day siege. Again, just like with Fort McHenry, Winfield Scott could storm the city, but because reinforcements are so hard to get, he doesn't want to lose half his men storming the city when he could just reduce it with artillery. So they start bombarding the city of Veracruz. And this is when another sort of very promising captain comes of age. Because with Winfield Scott down in Mexico is a young, promising captain of military engineering, Robert E. Lee. And Robert E. Lee very rapidly distinguishes himself in the fighting in and around Veracruz. It's Robert E. Lee that comes to the conclusion that they can unlimber naval cannons, move these naval cannons above, and point these huge cannons so that they could lob shells over the walls of Veracruz and into the city itself. And it's this act that causes the final surrender of the city. After 20 days of siege, Veracruz surrenders, largely because of the artillery placement of Robert E. Lee. And with Veracruz secured, Winfield Scott can move his army inland. He recognizes Robert E. Lee and attaches him directly to his command. And throughout the invasion of central Mexico, Robert E. Lee distinguishes himself again and again and again. At the Battle of Cerro Gordo, he finds a secret pass around the Mexican line. And there's this one battle where they have to fight in these lava fields. And Robert E. Lee's able to build a road to sneak them through the... It's just incredible. And basically Winfield Scott tells Robert E. Lee, he says, look, you are a bona fide military genius. He's never seen anyone that can think as boldly and as originally as Robert E. Lee can. And he determines that Robert E. Lee is meant for amazing things, but not in the way that Winfield Scott will expect. And finally, there is the Battle of Chapultepec, which is this castle that overlooks Mexico City. And on September 12th and 13th, the American army storms the castle of Chapultepec. Mexico City falls. The Mexican government evaporates. And they are finally forced to negotiate. And the Mexican government then proceeds to lose everything that they wanted, everything that they fought for. They are forced to sign the humiliating Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, in which they give up all of the land that you see over there, everything in gray. Light gray is supposedly given up by the Treaty of Velasco, but they refuse to honor the Treaty of Velasco. Everything in sort of darker gray is given up by the Mexican government, and the Mexican government in return receives $15 million. And they will receive, a few years later, they will receive an additional $10 million, 1853, for that tiny little strip in dark gray, the Gadsden Purchase. And the war with Mexico is finally over. And it is now time for the election of 1848. James Polk says he's not going to run again. Besides, accomplishing his 4 goals as president has basically broken the health of James Polk. He quits being president. His health is completely shattered. He goes back to Tennessee and he dies 3 months after quitting the presidency. And it's time to run the Whigs. The Whigs want Henry Clay to run. Henry Clay is not going to do it. A broken Henry Clay is in no condition to run for president. And then it forces the Whigs to make a really strange choice. The Whigs decide they're going to run Zachary Taylor as their candidate for 1848. But here's the rub. They select the war hero of the war that they opposed. So they were against the war, but they're going to use the war hero from the war to gain the presidency in 1848. That's Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor is also a Southerner. He's from Louisiana. And but he is not terribly fond of slavery. He has no real strong opinion on the subject, except to say, he's kind of like Thomas Jefferson. He doesn't like it, but he doesn't want to get rid of it either. And to balance out the ticket, they're not going to have a repeat of John Tyler. To balance out the ticket, they basically pluck out of obscurity this congressman, this obscure congressman from upstate New York named Millard Fillmore. And this is so that in case something happens to Zachary Taylor, they can have a good, loyal Whig who's not going to betray the whole party like John Tyler did. And there's the election of 1848. The Whigs finally win an election. Zachary Taylor becomes president, 1848. And then the luck of the Whigs strikes again. Zachary Taylor is dead within a year. He dies in 1850. And President Millard Fillmore gains the presidency. And this is when the Whigs discover that Millard Fillmore was one of the worst people they could have chosen as vice president. No one knows who he is. He's completely obscure. He has no strong allies or friendships in Washington. He has no real political clout of any kind. He has no real strong positions. And to be frank, he is of moderate intellect and talent. Fillmore ends up being an exceptionally weak president. He has no strong opinions. He has no strong policies. At a time in which that's exactly what's needed, is leadership. Because as a result of the Mexican cessation, the Congress is about to explode. And this is where we meet the last ride of Martin Van Buren, Andrew Jackson's vice president. Martin Van Buren feels that he was cheated of the presidency in 1844. He thinks it should have been him and not James Polk. And he's so angry at the Democratic Party that he leaves the Democratic Party. But then he attaches himself to a new party, which is forming out of the old Liberty Party. And this is called the Free Soil Party, which is given the absolutely hilarious name, the Free Soilers. Free Soilers. So Martin Van Buren is a Free Soiler. And the Free Soil Party is a moderate approach to abolition. The Free Soil Party is against slavery, but they're not for abolition. They're arguing that all of the soil, all of the ground conquered in the Mexican War should be free of slavery. It should be made free land, free soil. Not free as in given away, but free as in the absence of slavery. And Martin Van Buren, the vice president of Andrew Jackson, in his last ride, argues against slavery. And he does this not because he's intensely committed to the cause. He does this because he's a political opportunist. And he's smart enough to realize the tide is turning against slavery. He gets almost 10% of the popular vote. The Liberty Party got 2%. Now we're up to 10%. Again, this isn't total. This is like a bare minimum. The country is rapidly turning against slavery in favor of abolition. William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Cassius Clay. These guys are turning the tide. They are changing the nation. And there are no strong leaders in Congress. Millard Fillmore's a non-entity. Henry Clay's back in Tennessee. James Polk is dead. Martin Van Buren has joined the Abolitionists. The debate over the Mexican cessation is intense and it is bitter. Southerners vehemently argue against. They argue they have a natural right to own slaves throughout any new territories. And the northern states are much more abolitionist and oppose them at every turn. Northerners argued for no slavery of any kind in any of the acquired territories. And on their side, they have California, which enters the Union as a state and as a free state. And the people of New Mexico, I mean, slavery was illegal back when it was part of regular Mexico. They want no part in this horrible American institution. That the people in the Mexican cessation themselves want nothing to do with slavery. Now, during this intense debate in 1850, it breaks the parties. It breaks the parties. Duty to party is broken in favor of sectional loyalties. The Southern Whig finds himself arguing hand in hand with the Southern Democrat. The Northern Whig finds himself agreeing with the Northern Democrat against the Southern Whigs. The parties are cracking on the floor of the United States Congress. And the fact that there's no real leadership makes things even worse. And in an attempt to broker this, they eventually decide to directly debate the issue of slavery. And the Mexican War and the power of the abolitionists force one of the most remarkable debates to ever take place inside the U.S. Congress. They force an open debate on slavery on the floor of the U.S. Senate. And it's between David Webster, John C. Calhoun, William Seward, and Henry Clay. The state of Tennessee kind of begs Henry Clay to help them, and Henry Clay very reluctantly agrees. And he takes the Senate for the last time. And I'm not going to go over the great debate itself. That's covered very nicely in the David Shai book. But suffice it to say, only one of these men has a morally correct position. Only one of them is actually right in this debate. But there has to be a compromise. There has to build some kind of consensus. Otherwise, it's going to get just too vicious. I mean, there's a senator from Mississippi, Senator Foote, brings a loaded revolver into the Senate chamber and simply starts pointing it at the people he's arguing with. Things are getting very, very heated. And the only leader that has the reputation, that has the skill that everyone will listen to solve this ugly, bitter fight in Congress is ancient, broken Henry Clay. He's 73 years old. He'll be dead within 2 years. And Henry Clay does what Henry Clay does best. He builds a very complex compromise that everyone can kind of live with. And this is Henry Clay's last act, the Compromise of 1850. It has 5 major points. 1, Texas gives up all claims to New Mexico in return for debt relief. So all of the debt that Texas owes ends up being transferred to the federal government. And Sam Houston goes from president of the Texas Republic to governor of the state of Texas. 2, California enters as a free state, and the people of California want no part in slavery. 3, all other places in the Mexican cessation will be either free or slave depending on an internal vote. This is called popular sovereignty. So the people there are going to be allowed to vote. When they become a state, are they going to be a free state or a slave state? And this is kind of a sop that's given to the Southerners, because for the most part, the people of that area have already decided they do not want to be slave states. But it gives them a fig leaf. It gives them a fig leaf to say that they still fought for slavery. And as a way to sort of placate the Southerners, 4, they're given a much stronger fugitive slave law. And the much stronger fugitive slave law is directly aimed at shutting down Harriet Tubman and Cassius Clay, who are helping out the Underground Railroad. And slave trading itself is finally banned within Washington, D.C. itself. And the Compromise of 1850 results in that map on the left. But there's the question I'll ask you, and I want you to really kind of think about this. Maybe even, do write an answer down in your notebook. Does the Compromise of 1850 really solve anything? I mean, it diffuses the current political situation. Senator Foote doesn't end up shooting anybody. But does it really resolve anything at all? But one of the things that the Compromise of 1850 shows is that the second party system has failed. The Democrats are broken. The Whigs are broken. There is a real lack of leadership. Henry Clay is gone. James Polk is dead. Andrew Jackson is dead. John Calhoun returns to South Carolina and dies. And his political successor is a guy called James Henry Hammond. We'll meet him in a little bit. And all of these positions on the National Army, all of these positions on the Bank of the United States, all of these positions on territorial expansion, none of them matter anymore. For the 1850s, there's only going to be one issue that matters, and that issue is slavery. And you can compromise on tariffs. You can compromise on a national bank. You can compromise on a national army. You can't compromise on something. You can't compromise on the moral evil of slavery. You can't do it. The South will not give it up, and the North refuses to compromise. Because you can't compromise with a moral abomination like slavery. And as a result of the breaking of the second party system, a new party begins to form. In Wisconsin in 1854, the remains of the Liberty Party, the remains of the Free Soil Party, Martin Van Buren never becomes president again. Abolitionist Whigs and Northern Whigs combine to form a new political party. They absorb a lot of the old Whig ideas and combine it with a strong anti-slavery message. They're not necessarily abolitionist, but they're definitely in favor of free soil and against the expansion of slavery. To honor Thomas Jefferson, they named this new party the Republican Party. They don't know it at the time, but their most important early act is, in 1856, they are joined by an Illinois lawyer who is certain to carry on the legacy of Henry Clay, and his name is Abraham Lincoln. And now we've arrived at the end of all of this. So ultimately, you should have all the pieces to this puzzle. You should be able to come up with a solution to that question right up above me. What kind of America do you want? Would you prefer Hamilton's America or Jefferson's? Compare these two contrasting visions of the United States. Describe their role in the rise and fall of the first and second party systems. And you might want to dig a little deep. Maybe you want to go back to these Enlightenment ideas that Jefferson and Hamilton were trying to advocate. Certainly in Jefferson's case, it seems that way. So I might go all the way back to the Declaration of Independence. And here's my question. Are Hamilton and Jefferson's visions of America still valid today? How so? And now we've arrived at the end of this lecture. We have only a single lecture left, and this is where we're going to meet really big figures: Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee. And I will see you there.